I'm going to hand over to Rody. Thank you.
How's it going? Yes, thank you. Yeah, and not only desktop and web, but also we now have VR and some other things that'll be going on later. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to be talking about today is building adaptive UI UX, building for every device. When we're working with Flutter applications, as with most of us, we kind of came from, a mobile background. So, or at least some of us did, and then other people came from web, others from desktop. But because of that, the tools that we're given maybe only are optimized for one. So how do we build in a way that targets multiple screens? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you want to follow along, you can go to this URL, and there's the demos that you can run in the browser, as well as the source code that you can have. And of course, we can have a link to this in the chat below. And this is the GitHub. So what is the problem? Well, first of all, when you're working with Flutter applications and cross-platform frameworks in general, you're going to have, your application run on a variety of contexts. You have, a laptop with a keyboard that's attached to it. You have an iPad, which is primarily a touch input, but now has a keyboard and a trackpad option, and some that only have a keyboard option. Or with an Apple Pencil input, you have, watches that have just like a 2-inch touch target. You have phones that vary in so many different sizes. You have, large screen form factors for desktop. You have even small netbooks, which are still desktop forms, but still have, a small screen. You have things like the Pixelbook, which has a high DPI, but still a smaller screen. So, you can't really predict in all the different ways that your application is going to be running. As well as, we have 2-in-1 computers that, they may start out one way while your application is running and change during the context. And more recently, we have passive computing where you can actually, talk to your application without even using any UI at all, or even some minimal UI. So for example, like this is, the Lenovo smart screen, or if you're working with Alexa or Google, and just all the possibilities that your application can be opened up to, as well as something that people may not think about. It's like, well, why do I need to care about, a passive computing experience? Well, what about if someone can't see your application and they need some kind of accessible way to access it? Well, one thing you can do is make your app work in this kind of passive way where you can have this interchange with the user without displaying any UI. So like I did an experiment with my Tesla app where I used Dialogflow to take all the actions that you can use to control the car, and then based on a string input or voice input, you could actually control the car through voice. This is all in a passive context. So for the people that could see really well, I gave a chat mode, a cool different way to be able to control your car. And also, we have folding phones now, like which we didn't before. We have things like the Microsoft Surface Neo coming out, and the Samsung folding phone, and there's the Razer Fold. And there's so many different types that we didn't expect, as well as notches and whatnot. But I think Flutter does a really good job so far with building us the fastest UI toolkit that we can use to create these experiences. So first thing that you may do when you're building an application is you may start writing just like, okay, here's my desktop application, here is my mobile application, here's my, my special admin application, and you start to really like silo your application across different projects. The problem with this is, you start having so much duplicated code. So what are some things that we can do to fix this? First of all, we need to create a screen to stand on its own. An application should be able to be dynamic to the point where our screens are almost like view models, and they only change based on the things that we provide them. We don't want to have these so much business logic inside the screens that then we can't use that widget in another context. Because I used to do that all the time, but then I realized that my screen just may go in so many different ways that I wasn't expecting when I originally built it. Next, we only want to use the breakpoints that the parent gives. So this is, with the constraint kind of layout in Flutter, instead of using the bottom-up approach, we could just say, okay, I'm going to give my child this max size, and then the child, what it does is it just tries to be as big as possible and will change its layout depending on what its parent is. The nice part about this is you can create this really complex layout that it's self-responsive internally. So you can have, a master detail scaffold with a nested master detail scaffold with a nested master detail scaffold, allowing you to have like multiple column layouts for having these list views. But then as you change the screen size, you can get a mobile and tablet size experience. Next, we also want to send events up and data down. This is pretty, apparent, but we may not think about this when we're first building. We just may want to start with set state, and we start to have this kind of almost spaghetti code. And what you want to do is, Redux does this pretty well, except it's only a one-way data flow. But here we just use callbacks to send, okay, this thing is pressed, and then I'm also presenting this data. If you do it this way, this is very much the kind of view model approach, but it allows you to reuse a widget because it's just a dumb widget. It can be in whatever context it wants to be in, and you can wrap it in a smart widget, which is has the loading, the network library, but the widget itself that you're wanting presenting, you want to have be as reusable as possible. As well as we want to save our breakpoints in a single location. This is also something I had to learn the hard way, is you may just want to like set, okay, let me just set a constant for a tablet breakpoint, and you go to another file, then you have some other different types of breakpoints, and then you start to like really mix and mingle all your breakpoints. But if you have either a class or just a single place to put that, it's really nice to be able to modify them all at once. And we'll see later on why that'll be important as well. So here's just a simple example. We have a mobile view on the left and a tablet view on the right. Things that you may not think about when you first build this is, okay, well, the list view is shared across both of them. We have a detail screen that's only present on the tablet version. And on the mobile one, we're going to push to that detail screen. The floating action button is going to be a different location, but it looks like the app bar and a lot of this stuff are still the same. So looks pretty good. But I think we can do better. So what's the code that actually does this? First of all, we have just a simple layout builder that will, on the tablet breakpoint, return the tablet size and a mobile size for the other one. But what are the trade-offs with this approach? Because there are some advantages to doing it this way, and we'll go over those. So the cons are that you have this duplicated UI code. Every time that you're writing this, it's going to start to really duplicate like your screen, because you're going to have two different list views. And yes, you can internally save those out, but there can start to be states that your app can be in that you may not expect. It's really hard to refactor. So like if you want to change the list view, for example, you have to change it in multiple places, and maybe the way that the selection context and stuff like that. Different UI states. So like if you're on the mobile screen and you're on an iPad, for example, and you resize up to a full screen, then it's going to have a different state because it's going to have a different item selected. As well as it's hard to test mainly because the duplicated UI code. So what are the pros to this approach? Because there are actually pros. First of all, you have separate functionality. If you did want to have like, okay, this is my desktop screen, and I'm just going to optimize it for desktop and nothing else, and then doing the same thing for tablet and mobile. It's a quick solution because you can just set a breakpoint and then return a new screen. It's a clearly divided UI, meaning that this is desktop, this is mobile, this is tablet. And also you can kind of start to sort out like the advanced and basic features, so you can have almost like flavors to your screens that you're wanting to present. So what is an example of an adaptive layout? So first of all, an adaptive layout is going to change dynamically depending on the parent that it's being provided. So here we have a list view that will navigate to the detail screen, but then on a tablet version will select that item in the list view. So let's see that here. We can tap on it, and then great. But how do we build this? Because right here, we're only using one list view and only one detail screen. So how do we make it work on both? So this is where I'm coming up with adaptive lists. And if you're coming from iOS, this should sound pretty familiar, because this is what the master detail scaffold is all about. What we want to do is pass the selection context up, meaning that when you tap on the item in the list view, instead of doing something right away, we're just going to send it up to the top of the widget and let the parent decide what to do with that tap. We want to push to the detail screen when we're on a mobile device, but then we want to show the detail screen when we're on a tablet device. As well as we want to have a builder for the selection, because we want to return the detail screen with new data each time that a new item is selected. As well as we want to, the detail screen doesn't really care about the breakpoints of the parent. It only has its internal size that it is displayed upon. As well as the adaptive screen can take multiple options for layout, so it can be used in other places. We can, just literally drag and drop this thing wherever we need to. As well as we have one detail screen and one list view. This is really important. It means that we don't have any duplicated code. So let's just look at some basic code to see what we would do in this context for this adaptive list. So as before, we just have our parent widget, but let's look down. So first of all, we have the default use case, which is our adaptive list, which shows we want to, not automatically imply the leading, but that's for the app bar. We want to just, when it's on a mobile setting, we just want to navigate to the detail screen. Pretty simple. All we have to do is pass a selection context of the contact that is selected and then push. But then for mobile, what we do is check to see if it's greater than tablet. And then on the, for 300 pixels of the screen, we're going to have the adaptive list, which will have a floating action button location changed, which we can modify. And then we just updating a value notifier with the new selection. And then on the rest of the screen, what it is just a value listable builder, which takes that selection context and just, shows the detail screen with those contexts. Keep in mind, the detail screen here is the same one, but just with different settings. And so the nice part is, we don't have to duplicate anything. Everything is nice and dry. Next, I want to talk about interaction UI, because this is something else that changes across when you have a cross-platform framework. So first of all, desktop is going to have a different experience than web, and web is going to have a different experience than mobile. And you even have these weird, kind of crossovers where you have like a mobile web experience, which is kind of different than a native experience. And some examples of that are like, on iOS, you expect to see like an iOS alert dialog. On web, you expect to see like web alert dialogues, and then on desktop, it's depending on what you want to do. But what I mean is, it's not the same experience everywhere. It's customized for the platform you're running on. So one nice thing that I've always done in my applications that I try to right out of the gate is just try to build for Cupertino in addition to Material, because if you're doing this, and for those that are not aware, Cupertino is the Apple and iOS style guide for creating these widgets, which Flutter has a great library of them. But by doing this, you let your iOS users feel at home as well as your Android users. Now, of course, there's other design languages too, and you can implement as many different ones as you want. But some easy wins that you can get right out of the gate is anytime that a Flutter widget supports .adaptive, definitely use it. So like anytime you have a switch or a slider, or I think there's even like switch list tiles and stuff like that. And all these allow you to have internally under the hood, the Cupertino for Apple devices and then Material for everywhere else. We want to change the snack bar location. This is another easy win, but like on a desktop, you don't want to have the snack bar be like the full width of your screen. That would be kind of crazy. Instead, you want it to be just, a small normal size snack bar in a specific location. Same for the web. You may also have a different behavior on web where you don't want to just to show it and dismiss it. You want to let the user close it. Where on a mobile device, you do want to have it dismissed. And so there's just like little nuances that we got to be aware of. As well as we want to have a full screen dialog versus a pop-up. So like on mobile device, we want to, just show a full screen dialog. We don't have enough space to be able to do much more than that. But then on a tablet, we want to have like a dynamically resized pop-up that possibly can be dragged around, because this is something that the user is expecting. And if they don't see that, they're just going to see all this white space and be kind of turned off to that. As well as we want to take advantage of the extra space, just as before, because we have it's, when you're building this application for desktop, people can have their monitors really big, and there's so much white space that it makes your app look empty and unfinished. So you need to look to ways to find how to fill that space in a way that makes sense and also is good for the user. And you can also show a lot more on the screen. So especially with the latest in material design, there's a new density layout key that you can add that allows your UI to change accordingly. So like if you're, for example, on a desktop, you can have it more dense, but then on a tablet, less dense. As well as like we can think about, ways that we can multitask. So like on desktop, we can actually show multiple windows, as well as the web. Your app may live in multiple Chrome tabs or regular tabs, and it's something that mobile doesn't necessarily have, but it's still a very important behavior for your application. And if you're curious, I do have a demo on how to do the multiple window thing. You can check it out on my GitHub, but it is possible with Flutter, and it's another way to take your application to the next level. So let's look at like just a poor experience on the tablet. So first of all, when you're on a tablet view, you're just going to have a full screen pop up, and it's just going to take up the whole screen. And this looks really bad. So let's just see what that does under the hood. Well, first of all, we just have a settings icon, which then will show, or how do we fix it actually, rather? We're going to have a dialog that's going to show an adapted dialog with our settings screen. And this adapted dialog will actually internally wrap our responsiveness for it. And our fallback is always going to be just showing a full screen dialog of the settings screen. So let's see what that experience would look like. Well, we have a nice settings dialog here. And like I said earlier, all these demos are available on that link. But we have like a nice responsive modal dialog that will then, if you go too narrow or too shallow, it will actually go full screen again, as well as if you start with a mobile device, it will stay in a full screen context. This is pretty powerful because it allows us to use existing widgets and screens in a way that makes sense dynamically, because just because it starts off in a desktop view size doesn't mean it's going to end up there. This is just an easy win that we can do. So the adaptive dialog under the hood is actually pretty simple. And what we do is we just check to see if either side is less than our breakpoint, we want to return the child. Otherwise, we want to center that with the dialog size that we have predefined with an aspect ratio widget, and then the child, which will then shrink it down to where we need it. So this is really powerful. It allows us to have just a simple dialog. We just pass a child in, and we can make anything responsive like this. Next, we don't want to forget about dark mode. It was fun trying to figure out how to ways to support this before Flutter officially did. But this is something that is really important because you may think, well, I'm never going to use my app in dark mode, like light mode all the way. But the other argument to that is if you have trouble seeing something, your app needs to perform in high contrast settings. And one of the ways they do this is usually they invert the colors. And so this is very important because we need to make sure that we're not building for dark mode just because people want dark mode settings, but also for accessibility reasons, so that people can use your app in as many ways as possible. And the user should be able to control the setting, but it's not always required. Flutter now has a system mode, theme mode setting where you can actually set it to system. And then basically if the device has dark mode on, it will automatically switch to the dark mode theme or dark theme that you have in Material App. Otherwise, it'll go to light theme. So these are both, very important contexts. It's just a quick demo where you can have, just the colors. If you look and see, like the reds are just slightly muted, and we have different hover effects as well as shadows. So definitely add dark mode. Next, we also want to build for platform UI. So in addition to interaction UI, we have platform UI. And this is like, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, iOS, Android, and web. These are the specific contexts and domains that they exist in, and how do we build for them? This could also extend to things like, if we were building applications in VR, or if we're building applications in the watch, these are all the platform specifics that we have to fix. And we definitely want to make each one feel at home. So one simple thing that a lot of you run into when you first run your application on the web, you're like, wow, everything that my application is running, but then like, why don't I have like URLs to be able to like link to anything? And that's because you have to set up your application to support these various contexts. So one nice thing is if you use named routes on Flutter or on generate route, you can actually take advantage of this. So if you're using everywhere navigator pushed manually material page route in your application, you're not going to be able to take advantage of this. Put all that logic into on generate route and you'll be able to handle this. There's also something that's kind of like different on the web that you may not be logged in when you go really deep into a screen. So like, you may have a huge URL you may need to lazily load the user in, something that may be different than mobile. And of course, this depends on the application, but just be aware of it. As well as, on desktop, we want to support menus. This is also really powerful. It allows you to have a file context to be able to like, support keyboard shortcuts for that, but also just, some users just love browsing menus to see what all the application can do. When you have something selected or, just seeing like a quick way to create a new file. So one easy way to do this is to use the menu bar package that's in desktop embedding. And then you can just literally do like command in, and then now you have a shortcut for creating a new file, like if yours is a document application. So this is also pretty important. As well as we want to, mobile, we want to support URL schemes. So like, if our application runs on both the web and mobile, if they click on something and it's the same URL scheme, it'll actually open up the mobile or desktop application. So this is pretty powerful. We also want to support native APIs as well as, using established patterns out there. And, like I said before, for Apple devices, you want to support Cupertino when possible, because this allows the users to feel at home. And the same goes true for material design. You want Android users to feel at home because not every user knows exactly where to click. And you may have this fancy design on Dribble, but then the user has nowhere to touch. And that's something we want to be very mindful of. So here's just a simple example. We have the settings dialog, but we have material on the left and Cupertino on the right. And if you see, none of this is actually duplicated. We're using just adaptive stuff under the hood, and it allows you to use the same widgets in both contexts. One of my very early packages that I made for Flutter was called Native Widgets, which did this under the hood. I wrapped all kind of widgets and did both the platform implementations under the hood. So this is just an example of something you can do to reuse and make your application feel at home wherever possible. Adaptive UI doesn't have to be spaghetti code. I know it can seem like a lot, but it's really just about finding a pattern and sticking to it, because things are going to change. New paradigms are going to come and go, new devices are going to come and go, but it's about building your application in a modular way that you can compose it together. So I think that's really important. As well as we want to have like dynamic layouts. We want to build a layout that the user can control. So think about something like VS Code, for example. Every time you open up a file in VS Code, you don't just have like a predefined location. The user can drag that around and put it in separate tiles. They can make multiple windows. They can have multiple tabs, and it's all up to the user. And this is where I want to talk about giving control to the user for the layouts. We build responsive layouts, and we have to predict in as many ways that they can be used, but then also we can also hand that control over to the user to then let them take it even further, because a user is always going to have some window layout that's going to make sense to them that not every user is going to like. And this way you can cater as many people as possible. We can also let each window have a full screen context. And the example I'm going to be showing is a golden layout library that I found that I recently rebuilt for Flutter. So let's look at this. You can go to their website. I'll have the link on the repo, but basically golden layout is this thing that existed for web, and it's a window tiling library. There's other frameworks that do this too, but it allows you to take a tab and be able to resize it to any place. You can put it down in any location. You can close tabs, you can maximize tabs, and it's really powerful. So one thing about this is, like, just like VS Code, like the application doesn't set in a rigid way where all the windows can go. This allows the user to, based on their device screen, and see it even supports pop-out windows, but based on their device screen, they can customize it however they want. So how can we achieve this in Flutter? So like I said, I created a library called Golden Layout, and it does exactly this. It allows you to, in a very quick way, be able to let the user, specify where they want their tabs. They can drag it anywhere they want. And of course, this is I think the package was released like less than a week ago. So there's lots of stuff to be able to be improved. But you see, you can drag a tab from any one tab to another tab. And this, of course, is using like a tree data structure under the hood. But you can resize both vertically, horizontally. They all can handle wherever you want to have the tab live in. And of course, you can quickly close them. There's even ways to prevent a tab or window being closed. But just want to show you, this is just a simple way with just widgets under the hood to be able to give your layout anything. So if you have like a complex desktop layout or like enterprise application that has a bunch of dashboards, I would definitely suggest looking at this library, because this will let the user have total control. And you can kind of take away like some of the guessing game that goes into creating a complex layout, put it onto individual windows and let the user just select those windows. And then a nice way is they can kind of build their own layout as they make sense to them. And of course, the nice thing about this library too is the fallback is it opens up everything in a new tab. So by default, you just have like one big screen with a bunch of tabs across the top, just like a regular web browser. So even if the user doesn't want to have multiple windows, they can still have a very reusable way because the tabs are scrollable. So another package that I recently built was storyboards. And why would we want to do this, first of all? Well, we want to be able to build all your screens at once. I know when I'm developing an application, you may start with the login screen and then the home screen, setting screen, and then the about screen. And you have like 4 different screens. You're going back and forth between them. And sometimes you can like start to forget about screens. You forget that you may have changed your theme methodology. You may have changed like the way things look over here. And then just in terms of consistency, you need to be able to watch them all at the same time. So one thing you can do is edit your theme and watch all your screens update at once. So this is really nice with support with material design. You can just change the primary color and then everything changes, as well as you can work with dummy data. So I have the ability for you to add custom screens and custom lanes to be able to say, okay, I want this widget to be shown in a testing way to show this dummy data. So then that way you can have your protected screens, but then also show them in this dynamic way, as well as it supports all your routes in your application. So this is just another nice developer tool, as well as we can change our constants in one place and observe what breaks. So CSS would have this too, where you can just change one line of CSS and it'll change some stuff. But you can go to your constant file, and then because it supports hot reload, all your devices will change. So you can change like your breakpoints, and then you can see what flexes, as well as you can test on different devices at once. So you can have the same screen in multiple screen sizes. So you can make sure that you want to support specific sizes and make sure it looks good on there. So one thing for me was always having to test on the iPhone 5, because at the time my boss had an iPhone 5, and so that was always a pain. As well as being able to support restart. So I actually have a button now that'll restart your application, which is pretty nice. So let's look at an example. Here is the Flutter Gallery app running on a storyboard. As you can see on the top app bar, it actually picks up your theme, and the storyboard will change depending on what you have there. So like all your colors and your fonts and everything. So what's nice about this is, see, you can start to pick up so many things that you wouldn't have been able to pick up when you're testing your application, especially if you're like a QA engineer and you need to be able to test multiple screens at once and say, okay, are all these things look correctly? You can do widget tests. You can do all kinds of stuff, because this way you can basically multi-thread your testing if you wanted to, but it allows you to make sure that everything looks correct, because when you change something, you have to go, okay, let me go to the login screen, let me go to the about screen, let me go to the settings screen. And of course you can do golden file testing too, which you need to be doing, and all of that. But this is just a nice way when you're building something really quickly, you can have it all up at the same time. And of course, the link for this will be in the description. So something else I wanted to show you real quick before my presentation is up, and this is my Flutter editor I've been working on. If you've been following me on Twitter, maybe you've been seeing a little bit of this, but making a ton of progress on it. So if you want to try it out for yourself, it's flutterweb.app, and there's the link there. So let's go ahead and check it out. So one interesting thing that I've been working on is a widget studio, allowing you to have, a storyboard kind of context for, creating widgets. As you can see, the cursor is actually changing, and this is because under the hood, you can change depending on if you have the space bar or command key selected, as well as, you can change your icons, you can have PWA manifest generator, as well as being able to open up the project directly in VS Code. So this is all running on the web and creates a real Flutter application. So let me just let the GIF restart. But yeah, what's cool about this is it allows you to work really quickly in a prototyping way to be able to add multiple screens and edit your files. On desktop, it actually can compile your Flutter application. But yeah, here we see we're using a native color picker, which is really nice. And it's just like a really, dynamic way. Here we can easily drop and create widgets with just, really quickly, which is really cool. And then you can even control context, like when this button is tapped, launch the screen, show this dialog, and all that kind of stuff is supported. So yeah, like I said, make sure to check it out in the link below. So what's the conclusion? Well, first of all, you got to embrace the change and just know that the devices we have now are not the devices we're going to have in the future. Things are going to be different. We're going to have a new device that's going to come out next year that we're not predicting, and it's going to change everything we think about design and layout. And then, things may also change. Like there's different, there's Desktop Neo, for example, is a really cool desktop thing that looks into the future to see like how can we work with, experiences. Fuchsia is another example, with desktop, and how do we change the way that we build our UIs, like, because it doesn't have to be static. But the thing is also, we don't want to just like alienate our users because something changes. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing makes sense, is not too drastic, but is always making progress. So first of all, create a pattern and stick to it. This is really important. Whenever I start a Flutter application, I will, whatever pattern I'm choosing at the time, like for right now, I always have a very specific folder structure. I have two different types of libraries that I go from. I either go with a what's it called, a Flutter more and basically shared preferences approach, where I have a relational kind of data, as well as I've been using more recently Freezed and Provider in addition to value notifiers to be able to have this dynamic way. And it all depends on the data, first of all. But whatever pattern you stick to, make sure to go and finish your application with that pattern. You're always able to refactor, but I would suggest waiting to refactor until after you've released the application. Your app can get into this like infinite cycle of just constantly changing it. And I know because I do this all the time, but if you wait until after you release, then you can refactor, write your tests, make sure that whatever you refactor doesn't break your existing stuff. As well as we want to extract widgets and components wherever possible. A pro tip is if you were building your applications, build it with as much UI on the single screen as once without using methods. Only after you finish the screen, then start extracting, because it'll start to get really complicated with all the callbacks going up and down. But yeah, definitely do this, because that way you can then use your widgets in wherever you want. A good rule of thumb is your only import should be Flutter material or the core library, so Dart Math and stuff like that. Because if you do, and you only support those, not only can you reuse them, but you can make sure that they are logicless, meaning that they don't depend on anything else besides Flutter. And then also you can use, you just pass the data and then let it present. We also want to send all the actions up if we want to reuse the screen. This means passing up all the context for, on tap, on long press, whatever we want to support for that widget. As well as we want to pass down the data. So this means every time that the data changes, we want to have the widget rebuild as well. Now you can have intermediate widgets that are smart and do the logic, like I said before. Like if you have a widget that just wraps it with a stream builder and does everything, we want to make sure that that is done in a good way, because when you have that layer and that separation, then you have like a kind of view model approach where you can change out the widget without having to change out the model and the logic. As well as we want to write dry UI code, because as with everything, the more code that we write that is duplicated, the harder it is to test, and the more places that we got to change it. So make sure that when you're doing this, you can build your application in such a faster performant way that makes sure that we're not duplicating anything, as well as just building an application that can run in multiple contexts. Like I said before, not everybody builds with the cross-platform mindset in mind, but this is important because we have such a powerful toolkit, which is Flutter under a hood. And if we're not like taking advantage of it, then why are we using a cross-platform framework? If you're only using Flutter to build like an iOS application or an Android application, then I feel like you're only taking like advantage of like 5% of what it can offer you. So make sure to go to this link if you want to see the examples. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, GitHub, and of course you can reach out to me on email. And thank you so much. And yeah, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rody. Very, very interesting stuff you've been working on. I'm sure you're part machine.
Yeah, definitely. He's the hero that